So welcome Pace University community setters. We are joined today here by a great panel and a great group of individuals to talk to you about Constitution Day 2020 and why we're here. And by way of introduction, I just want to introduce myself. I am Sean Livingston, the interim director for the Center for Student Development on the Pleasantville campus. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Mike.
Everyone, I'm Mike Cordova. I'm one of the interim directors for SEDAC at the New York City campus. And we're excited to be here to talk with some assemblymen and also in a crucial year such as 2020 with an election year, and then also the importance of the Constitution Day and Citizenship Day.
So today is all about learning and understanding why we celebrate this day and going back to 1787, right? When the Constitution was signed. We want to make sure we celebrate why we have the power of citizenship and the value and the power behind our United States Constitution. And so these amazing panelists have given up their time today during a busy season to be with us. And to kick us off today, I want to introduce to you one of our guest speakers. He's a well-known name to Pace, Senator Harckham. Thank you first and foremost for taking your time and being here with us today to help us celebrate. I know before joining the New York State Senate, you were a communications professional, worked on a series of different projects, including affordable housing, working for the Westchester County Board of Legislators. And you've served as a governor in a variety of positions underneath and in the Cuomo administration. Currently serving as the chairman of the New York State Senate Committee on Alcoholism and Substance Abuse. And I know you've done a lot of great work in the community to raise awareness around treatment and comprehensive issues, focusing on compassionate treatment and comprehensive treatment. In terms of your relationship to Pace, I know you've often visited our campus in Pleasantville, and you are a huge supporter of our Pleasantville Student Veterans Association, including helping them to secure a recent $200,000 grant, which helped us to create a brand new and first of its kind Student Veteran Resource Center here on the Pleasantville campus. I also know that last June, you were honored by one of our colleagues for your significant contributions to our Westchester community at our Pride Month event. So Senator Harckham, thank you for being with us, and we turn this to you.
John, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Always great to be with my Pace friends. Wonderful to see everybody. Also honored to be here with my colleagues, Assemblyman Avenante, Assemblywoman Glick, two people who I admire and respect greatly. And Tom and I share the Pleasantville campus. So it's good synergy that we have there. When we speak about citizenship and the Constitution, when I think of citizenship, I first think of immigration. And that's my personal background. 3 of my 4 grandparents were immigrants. And when they came to this country, much like today's immigrants, they came with nothing and they were looking for better opportunity. And all of them were treated very poorly, unfortunately, the way many immigrants are treated today. And my grandmother was a seamstress in the garment district. My grandfather, one of my grandfathers worked on a fireboat in New York Harbor. And my other grandfather worked in a building as a service employee. That's when the elevators were run by hand. The boilers were stoked with coal. There were spittoons that had to be emptied. And the hours were constant, 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, no vacation, no time off. And so one day they had enough and they had a wildcat strike in their building, and it spread throughout the neighborhood and it spread throughout New York City. And it was the birth of the Service Employees Union in New York. So I associate labor rights with the immigration movement. And my grandparents wanted to be citizens because of the opportunities that this country would afford them, even though the establishment did not treat them well. So, you know, immigration and working with immigrants has been central to my work. I represent Northern Westchester, parts of Dutchess, parts of Putnam, incredible diversity in the district, vibrant Hispanic community, robust Muslim community, great African-American community. But if you look at Westchester County, 1/3 of the residents are immigrants. So it's an incredibly diverse immigrant population. So things like the DREAM Act were so important to me. Things like the Green Light Bill, keeping ICE out of our state courts. And so we need to find ways to have a smoother path to citizenship for our immigrant community. So when I think of citizenship, I think of immigration, and I think of the great promise immigrants bring to this country, and what they've done, particularly for New York State and also for the rest of the country. So that's a few words on citizenship, and I look forward to the panel and the questions.
Senator, sincere thanks for your time and for your remarks, and we're excited to hear some more from you in our Q&A upcoming. And we'll pivot. We've got a few guests with us today, so I want to go ahead and take the time and pleasure to introduce our next quote unquote panelist, our expert, and another very familiar friend to us on the Westchester campus, someone who has helped us to co-facilitate our celebration of Constitution and Citizenship Day for the last number of years. But this is Assemblyman Tom Avenante. Assemblyman Avenante has spent his career in public service and working for the government. As a current prosecuting attorney for Dobbs Ferry and Ardsley, as a member of the Greenburgh Town Council, and a longtime member of the Westchester County Board of Legislators, and for the past 10 years, a member of the New York State Assembly. Assemblyman Avenante is the current chair for the New York State Assembly Committee on Banks. He's a leader who has worked tirelessly on issues of environmental conservation, including gun violence, protecting women's rights, and advocating for children with special needs. Assemblyman Avenante is no stranger here. Among many visits to our campus, he has also been a featured speaker at many different events. And throughout the pandemic, Assemblyman Avenante and his staff have worked very hard on behalf of PACE by sharing timely information and raising issues with the governor's office to help us get answers so that we can better serve our community. So please help us welcome Assemblyman Tom Avenante.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the chance to see all of you. It's nice to be back on the campus, even if only virtually. We have, we're living in interesting times, and certainly is for many people today. As my colleague from the Senate pointed out, we're having citizenship tests these days. People who come from another country are afraid that somebody's going to come up to them and demand that they identify themselves as American citizens. And you know, when we talked about originally, you said you wanted just to pick a topic that's current, that deals with the Constitution. I'm not quite sure where to start. We are finding that there are so many parts of the Constitution which form the basic fundamental foundation for our country that are being questioned, challenged, ignored, misinterpreted. And so much of this is coming from those with so much of this noise is coming from those with the loudest bullhorns. The people who are supposedly leading our country, our president and some of the leaders of Congress who just seem to want to ignore the protections. I mean, you may have just heard that the Attorney General of the state of New York, the highest law enforcement official, the highest government lawyer, is saying that we should be investigating some public officials for sedition because they allowed people to protest in their cities. He's talking about investigating mayors who don't forcefully put down people who protest. Well, you know, if you take a look at the United States Constitution, the First Amendment is about free speech. And it's about the right of people to peaceably assemble and petition their government. They didn't read the Constitution, or they don't care about the Constitution. They're certainly not interested in teaching their supporters what the Constitution means, except from their point of view. Now, I don't want to cross into politics. I'd like to stay back a little bit more on political science. But in this day and age, it's really hard to separate the two because it's hard to have a debate with someone who doesn't recognize that we have a constitution that has to be followed. This whole concept of sedition is a perfect example of it. Most people don't even know what it is, never heard of it. So I've Googled it, and Google says, well, you know, sedition is to conspire to overthrow or destroy by force the government of the United States or to level war against them. And the city mayors who are under attack, they have been defending the Constitution. They have been saying we've got to allow people to protest because that's what this country is all about, and that's what the Constitution says. But that message is not coming across. So it's important that we have these conversations like we're having today. I mean, I'm looking back, you asked me before, when was the first time I was here on campus? It was in September of 2016. And my remarks dealt with free speech and political action in our democracy. And I was talking about the difference between free speech and verbal acts. Your students, I'm sure, who study the Constitution will understand that verbal acts are protected as long as they don't lead to violence, as long as they don't cross that line to sedition. So people can protest, people can do all types of things, and they're protected under free speech. You know, we have that old line of you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, but you can if there's a fire. Another protection in the Constitution is the right to vote. That also seems to be under attack. Those who look at history realize that you know, the right to vote is a basic constitutional right. It's the basis for a democracy. It was established in the federal Constitution, Amendments 15, 19, 26. They protect voting rights against discrimination on account of race, color, previous condition of servitude, sex, age, etc. But we now have people who are trying other ways to limit access to the ballot box. Now, I can go on with about 15 more examples. We're in difficult times. I'm going to stop here. But I think the point that I'm making here is that students have to recognize that this old, small little document that formed the basis of our country in the beginning is still very important today, and that they have to learn what it's all about. It may be a small little booklet, but there have been thousands and thousands of decisions by courts interpreting this, and every one of those decisions is important. And our students have to become informed. They've got to become an educated electorate. And the way to protect the democracy is to use it, to understand it, and to make sure that you stand up for all of the rights that you have in that Constitution. Thank you for giving me a chance to say hello. I'm looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Assemblymember Abinanti. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Michael Cordova, to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Sean. And also thank you, Assemblyman Abinanti, for providing us with insight and wisdom on the Constitution, and also the importance of the Constitution for young adults, such as college students here at PACE, as the importance more so now than ever today to understand it, especially with today's political climate in our nation. But for our next speaker, I'm going to go ahead and have the pleasure of introducing Assemblywoman Deborah Glick. And so welcome, Assemblywoman Glick, and we want to thank you for participating in our 2020 Constitution and Citizenship Day event here at PACE. So a little bit about her. So Assemblywoman Glick is the first openly LGBT member of the New York State legislature. She's also the author of the historic Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act and has worked on issues of concern to women for 30 years, including advocating for reproductive freedom, a change in the rape statutes, women's health concerns, in addition to many other issues. Assemblywoman Glick is also the chairwoman of the New York State Interest in Albany for Higher Education Committee. She represents not only PACE in Albany, but also the interests of all New York State students in higher education in the colleges and universities they attend. So here at PACE, we do want to say thank you so much for your service and also what you do for us here within higher education. Assemblywoman Glick helped secure $500,000 in New York State grant funding for the STEM Education Resource Center at Seidenberg. She has also been an honorary degree recipient from Pace University, something we're very proud of. And also, we want to welcome you here today and thank you for joining us via Zoom. Assemblywoman Glick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The interesting thing is that the Constitution was essentially ratified, and then there were, Monroe said, you know what, here's 12 amendments to ensure that we cover more bases, 10 of which were accepted, and that's the Bill of Rights. There are 27 amendments. There are really 25 active ones, because one put prohibition into effect and another eliminated prohibition. So there are, while there were 27 amendments, there are only 25 that are active. And there's been a lot of talk about the 25th Amendment in the last couple of years. It's a way that in the event that the president is incapacitated, that there is a method for the cabinet and the vice president to take action. Or it's in a, I guess when a president has undergone anesthesia. I think that happened with Bush, that he invoked that with some sort of written document. But of course, the Constitution, while is a living document and is a framework for our government, and as my colleague, Mr. Abinanti said, there have been, myriad decisions determining whether or not certain statutes actually pass muster based on the constitutional framework. But of course, the Constitution has been an imperfect document because it's left a lot of people out. And over time, decisions have had to be made by the Supreme Court to bring to life and reflect the current understanding of not just who are Americans and who have the rights, but one of my favorite amendments, of course, is the 9th, because it says with great deal of foresight that in fact, just because a right is not included in the Constitution doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So without that, there are a lot of the more expansive ideas would not have been possible, because we have had a lot of originalists, and they would say, well, it's not there. It's not actually in the Constitution. Where do you see that right? And whether it's a woman's right to choose in 73, or more recently, marriage equality, without the 9th Amendment saying that just because it's not explicitly written into the Constitution doesn't mean that a right can't exist. So it is frightening on some level to see the way in which the current administration has pushed the boundaries. The repeated overreaching made many people concerned. But I do think that it gives one hope that there have been perilous times before in our country. And it is the old story of, if the tree didn't bend, it would break. And the Constitution has survived many threats and challenges in the past. So I'm an optimist, and I believe that we will, again, be in a position to see that through the electoral process and the message that is sent by the electorate, that the Constitution will remain alive and well and adhered to with greater fealty than it has most recently. So I wasn't sure if I should just stop there and allow for some questions. You know,
Sure.
McCall, I could go on forever.
No, thank you so much. Thank you, Assemblywoman Glick, for providing us with your insight on the Constitution. But then also the one thing that stood out to me right now is talking about optimism, right? I think that optimism is so key and important that our young adults and also just people across this nation are looking for with regards to what's happening with COVID, but then also what's happening, you know, obviously with the election year this year as well. So we'll see what happens. But we're going to now open it up to a Q&A from all of our obviously guest speakers today. And so if anyone would like to ask a question, please notify Sean and I. You can either hit the raise your hand option on Zoom if you're familiar with that, or you can also write questions in the chat section. We can call on you from there. But I know first up, we have Vanessa Herman who would like to comment or ask a question to our three guest speakers.
Hey everyone, Deborah, good to see you as always. I got to chat with Tom and Peter, Pete, before we started. I just wanted to start off by saying, from the bottom of my heart, I know how busy you are, and I wanted to thank you for taking time to do this and giving. We have some senior leaders here at PACE, a lot of faculty on and staff, and of course I see, I believe, a couple students. And just how important it is for them to have this opportunity to hear from you and meet you, even though it's virtually right now, to hear about how you incorporate these beliefs and values you have based on the Constitution into your daily lives and the work you do to protect us in Albany and in the state. So I really just wanted to take a moment and thank you very much. And so I don't have a question. I just wanted to give a shout out.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. Anyone, if you have a question, just let us know. Yeah.
So I do have a question. It would just caught me while I was sitting here listening to the vast experience that we have in servant leadership. And I know that Mike and I both teach that in the leadership work that we do. So I'm curious about a perspective, knowing that this is going to be going eventually into the hands of students. For each of you on this call, if you could remember back to when you were 18 to 22 and you had earned your right to use your voice as a citizen of our country, what advice, if you could go back, would you give to your former self between 18 and 22 about the power of their voice? And Senator Harkum is laughing at me already. Maybe you want to answer first, but I just would love that perspective because I think our students will really relate to that.
That's an interesting question. I would say, first of all, when I was in my late teens and 20s, I was a mess, and that was another story. But I always voted. You know, I grew up in a household where politics and government were important, and I always voted. And I didn't necessarily have the clarity to understand why at that point in my life. That evolved as I grew older. But I always voted. And what I tell young people now, because so much of the conversation is being driven by young people, you know, the package of common sense gun safety that was passed by the legislature, a lot of that was driven by students after the Florida shooting. And it was a national movement on common sense gun safety. If you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, in my district, it has all been students, high school and college age students. And working with Deborah and Tom, we've made bail reform, a whole host of police reforms, discovery reforms. All of these things are fragile. You know, they're only as fragile as the people who elected them. And so if people support these things that they call for, especially the young people who are the conscience of the movement, they need to vote. It is so critical because if you want systemic change, you have to vote and solidify it and ratify it because it's only as fragile as the people who enacted it in office.
Tom, Deborah, either one of you have some additional thoughts you'd like to add?
Well, you know, I went to college at a terrific time. There was a tremendous amount of student activity. I was involved in the student mobilization, which was an anti-war movement, before I could vote. And it was followed up by just a tremendous amount of activity. I was active on campus. New York State passed prior to the Supreme Court in 1970, New York State legalized abortion. And I had the great good fortune to be involved with a lot of people demonstrating. I was a little shocked because on that subject, the numbers of people were not as large as the anti-war demonstration. So when I went to Washington for the first time on an abortion march, I was like, well, where the heck is everybody? Because I was used to hundreds of thousands of people in the street, and there were like hundreds of us. So, but I had the great good fortune of having some mentors. For the young students, look up Flo Kennedy. She was a radical Black lawyer, and meeting her when I was in college was transformative. So I would say, look for mentors, get involved on issues you care about, because that will be a lifelong passion. So I think I came from a family that voted. I was taken with my parents when they went to vote. So by the time I was able to vote, it was like a usual thing. But I also was very active in the crises of the day. And 1970 was the first Earth Day. I was still on campus. And so be involved. You meet great people that way, much better than, being in a bar, which of course you can't do now anyway, but you meet people who are like-minded and who are interesting because their minds are active, they're energized, and you learn from them. So that would be my advice, only because that was the trajectory of my own life, and I think that it has served me well.
Thank you sincerely. Assemblyman Avenante.
Sure. I'd second what my colleague said. I would add, though, don't get discouraged. When you're 18 years old, everything seems like a crisis because you don't have much to compare it to. Now, that sounds, like I'm not putting people down by that. I'm not trying to sound arrogant. But after you go through a crisis after crisis after crisis, you start to be able to judge what's important and what is just an annoyance. And so when you push for something and it doesn't happen, it feels like the world is falling apart around you. No, just keep pushing. Just keep working, because eventually you'll make a difference. Eventually you'll be able to have an impact. But you've got to learn what you're talking about, and you've got to use those facts to convince other people. It'll take a while, but in a democracy, facts and people working together do make a difference. Now, I said also learn what you're talking about. When I was 18, I was a conservative. I supported Barry Goldwater and Buckley for mayor of New York City. I then went from there to support Bobby Kennedy, Gene McCarthy, and George McGovern. I sometimes think the political spectrum is not a straight line, but a circle, because I went so far to the right, I came back on the left. And my colleague, Deborah Glick, knows that we have pretty much the same political philosophy, and we're progressives. We're anything but conservatives. But I started to look into what I was arguing, what I was espousing. And I realized, hey, I'm on the wrong side of these issues. As Deborah said, the abortion issue, I was a Catholic and I was not pro-choice. But then when I started to look at the facts and see what we were doing to women and how unfair this was and how unconstitutional it was, I flipped to the other side and became the attorney for the Westchester Coalition for Legal Abortion in Westchester County. So facts matter, but don't get discouraged. Study your issues carefully and assert them in a fashion that you'll convince people to do things. Don't be obnoxious about it. Don't be overly aggressive. Be aggressive, forceful, but do it in a fashion that'll convince people. But don't give up. Don't be discouraged. We really need you to be involved. And secondly, I always voted as well from the first time I had a chance. There's so many elections that are determined by a handful of votes. I do some election law work. I just got a call last night where the mayor, where the board in a village in Westchester County, right now, as they're counting the votes, is one vote apart. One vote. And so they've got a few more absentees to count. And that election is going to be determined by 1 or 2 votes. Now, how would you feel if you were one of those people who lives in that village and the person on the other side who you don't like wins because you didn't go back down or you didn't fill out an absentee ballot to cast that vote? In a democracy, action matters and voting matters.
I want to say thank you to all 3 of you for taking time to respond to that. And I really echo at the end of this, the conversation on staying encouraged. And then you also mentioned towards the end, making sure that you get factual information to inform decisions that you make for yourself. And we had a great question come in on the chat that I'd love to hear some perspective from each of you on. There's so much in the media, especially in social media, where our college-aged and young people live and spend time. And what advice or recommendations do you guys have or could share about, getting the right facts to make informed decisions versus maybe what's just blatantly put in front of our young people's faces?
Want me to jump in first?
Go ahead, Tom.
College is all about. College is a place where you learn how to explore, where you learn how to think. Again, that sounds somewhat arrogant, but that's what I learned in college. And that's the most important part. You learn how to learn. You learn the difference between facts and opinions. You learn what's important in making decisions for the rest of your life. That's what that's all about. It's unfortunate that people are now separated. And I know we were talking earlier about how the students want to get back together again as soon as possible because they miss that environment, that challenging environment where people get to challenge each other and talk to each other and think about things. And that's what college is all about. So use your college experience to help you learn how to critically think and to challenge and to look for the facts and determine what's true and what is false.
Well, I would simply say that it has changed from when we were younger, and I'm speaking, Pete and Tom and I, when there were opinion leaders or media personalities who there were much fewer. There wasn't cable news. You had Walter Cronkite. You had Chet Huntley and David Brinkley and Eric Severide. These are folks who were viewed by the public as neutral arbiters of fact. And so you watch the news, regardless of which station you turn to, there was not huge divergence. There was an agreement on what were the generally held beliefs about what happened in an incident. Over time, it's eroded, and of course, the worst thing that's happened to anything has been 24-hour cable news. That has required them to fill time, and filling time means that they're trolling for anything. So we all will get a report. Before it lands on your desk, you're getting a call from a reporter. What did you think about the report? It just arrived. I haven't had a chance to read it. Yeah, well, what do you think? And people are totally comfortable now saying what they think about a report which they have not had a chance to read. So I would suggest that you read more than one thing. You ignore social media for anything other than entertainment. And that you look at a wide range of sources. BBC News, The Guardian, because we don't hear anything in this country about the rest of the world, except the most narrow, slanted reaction to some minor thing, right? So you don't hear about what's going on every day in Belarus on our news. But if you read BBC, you listen to the BBC report, and pick your own sources. There are a million papers that are out there, whether it's, you know, the New York Times, Washington Post, the Dallas Morning News. You know, there's a million places where you can get information. Try to figure out getting more than one source, but a source that is not social media, or particularly even necessarily cable news, because that has hardened into its own camps.
Deborah, you took me down memory lane with those newscasters. I think Deborah and Tom covered it well. I'll just sort of hybridize. I agree that social media is not a good place to get news. What you want are news outlets that vet. You know, in the old days, a journalist had to have 2, 3, 4 sources. They'd sit down with the editor, and she or he would verify the sources, they'd verify the facts before things were printed. A lot of the online journalism isn't done that way anymore. It's someone goes out in the field, they put it up on their blog, and it becomes news. So I would suggest, to Deborah's point, get several sources that still use verified techniques. There's still editorial process. And then get out of your comfort zone. So if you're comfortable with the New York Times, read the Wall Street Journal. You know, you want to get a comparative set of analyses, and then some of the news wire services, AFP, Reuters, Associated Press, because they're not editorializing, they're reporting from the field. So that's what I would suggest. And as Tom said, you know, learn as many sources as you can and figure out your thought process and what makes you comfortable. But I would suggest also get out of your comfort zone and read other sources as well.
Can I add another point? I want to highlight, my two colleagues just made a point that's really worth hearing again and again and again. When I first became an assembly member 10 years ago, I started driving up late Sunday night so I could be there for Monday morning. And I flipped on one of the NPR stations, and lo and behold, I got the BBC. I said, what is this? Now, the only time I'd ever seen the BBC was when I was traveling with my family overseas, and it was on the TV. And now all of a sudden I'm listening to it on the radio. And I'm hearing, where is that country? Never heard of that country before. And what are they doing? And I'm learning about a world that we don't hear about in our country. Now, why is that important? Because it gives you context. There was an old, many, many years ago, there was a magazine cover that gave the view of New Yorkers of the rest of the United States. And it had New York City, and to the left of it, it had New Jersey, and to the left of that, it had Chicago, and then to the left of that, it had California. And so, you know, that's kind of the narrow view of the average New Yorker. And we all know that that's not the United States. So if that's your view, imagine what the rest of the world looks like that you're missing. And so I think Deborah's point about the BBC, Peter's point about getting conflicting news reports, you know, but Peter's also made the point that they should be responsible news outlets. They might have a slightly different take on the news, but they're giving you the news, what actually happened, the facts. They might interpret it a little differently, but they're giving you the facts. These are not conspiracy theories. They're not things that are made up. They are actually what's happening. And it's so important that everyone get the facts and that everyone get the context so they could understand. Deborah made the point of Walter Cronkite and Chet Huntley, et cetera. They were giving people the facts and the context, and they wouldn't dare say something that they hadn't confirmed. No speculation. This is what happened. You decide whether it was good or bad or whatever, but here's the context. We get so little of that today, and there's just a few news outlets that still give you that. So I think what Peter and Deborah said is so important. I want to reiterate it.
No, thank you so much to all three of you for your perspective on the media, but then also particularly for our young adults in the room as well on social media. I think that we do live in an age today that, for instance, Twitter is now having to fact check the president. And that's really where our sources that the students are getting, right? And so there was another similar question to that as well of how do you educate students on utilizing different tools? And so we appreciate your perspective of widening their perspective, not just obviously social media, but also worldwide news as well and other outlets. So thank you so much for your perspective on that. So we're going to go on to our next question, which is going to be our last question for the event. And thank you all so much. But Roshana, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and we'll have you ask the last question for tonight.
Great, thank you. So what I wanted to ask you all about is the census itself, because there's so much going on with the census right now. But also, 2020 aside, the census has always been sort of this weird, really stodgy, paperwork type of issue that a lot of people haven't really cared about. And so many critical things in our government are not things that are always the most interesting. So I would love to hear how you sort of work with that and how you make sometimes the process, the boring, the unsexy things interesting to a wider audience to get them engaged.
I would just say that thank you to PACE, because one of our first census activities was getting people aware of the fact that they could get jobs working with the census and what the census was and why we were inviting them to a discussion so that they could maybe sign up to become census workers. And then last week, the week before, it's a blur, I joined some colleagues and we did a march, a sort of a parade through parts of the Lower East Side with some drummers, handing out census information and trying to get their attention. These were great drummers, so we really did get people's attention. They came out of shops and onto their balconies or out of their lobbies. And then, the minute they saw this activity, a lot of people and the drumming, we shoved information into their hands. And lots of people said, I did it. So you try to find ways that, we have, every time we have been on any kind of Zoom event with community, we have mentioned the census, because people don't know that even if they are displaced, they have decided to leave New York City for a month or two, take their kids and go to their in-laws who have a backyard. They can still go online and do the census from their other location, noting that they're from East 12th Street. So we've tried to do it in our newsletters. It's hard, and the numbers are not good. And New York's going to lose seats in Congress, and we're going to lose a lot of money because people have not gotten with the program. Now, we have till September 30th, but then there's the lawsuit. It's still going through the courts about how they, again, the attempt to undermine the count has been not surprising, but shocking. So, you know, those are ways in which we've tried to make something that's a little bit dry and people don't really grasp, and they're afraid also. It's like, what kind of questions am I going to get asked? I don't want to give all this information. We've spent all this time telling people, don't give your information. And then it's like, here, fill out the census, give your information. But they don't ask those kinds of financial things that scammers do. So that's some of what we've done to try to make it a little bit more interesting.
First, I want to thank Pace for this forum. This is tremendous. I apologize, I'm gonna have to drop off in a minute. But Deborah raised such an important issue around the challenges of the census coming from the federal government. So in my district, I don't have to promote the census. I have to defend the census because people are afraid that they're going to be asked citizenship questions, and they're terrified of answering the census. And so there's further fallout from that to other groups that feel marginalized. So the census itself is probably more visible than it has been in years in my district, but for the wrong reasons. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to convince people that it's safe to fill out the census, and yes, they're filling it out is crucial, as Deborah said, for financial resources and for representation. But thank you all so much, and great to be with Deborah and Tom. Good to see you again, and thanks everyone.
Senator Harckham, thank you, and appreciate your time tonight. No big deal if you have to run. Appreciate it. I know we'll see you on Monday. So
Thank you.
Thank you to Pace for hosting this. I'm looking for the provision in the Constitution, but I know it's here. The United States Constitution requires a census every 10 years. We're supposed to count everybody residing here, whether they're citizens or not, because we distribute representation, not for just citizens, but for people, for all people who live within our country. And we distribute money on the basis of the number of people in particular places. So we're talking about billions of dollars that the federal government distributes every year. So if you, as a student, are concerned that your hometown is not getting enough money, or the local library is closing because they don't have enough money, well, if you didn't register with the census, then if they didn't count you, then you don't count, and your community is going to get less money. And you're going to have less representation in Washington in the House of Representatives. So it's very important. People say, why does it matter? Why am I giving up this information? You are doing this so that you get fair representation in Washington and you get your share of the money coming back to your community. So it's very important that every one of our students not only register with the census, but get their entire family and every one of their friends to go online. They're the ones who are great online. Go online and fill out the census form and make sure everyone you know fills out the form as well. Because in our Constitution, we give everyone the right to be represented. So if we're talking about the Constitution, that's a very important point that we want to drive home. This Constitution says everyone, not just citizens, not just rich citizens, not just landowners, everyone is supposed to be counted. And that's the way we distribute representation and money. So once again, thank you for giving giving us the opportunity to speak with your students. Yes. And with you.
Yeah, and I would say first and foremost, I know we've thanked you all a bunch of times, but sincerely on behalf of Pace University, not just for today, but for many, many years of service from each of you in the different projects, the students, faculty, staff, and legislation that you've touched, helped to promote or push forward to better our university community. We could not be more in gratitude for your service in general, but also to Pace specifically. So thank you so much for your time tonight. I also want to sincerely thank our campus partners and colleagues who got on this call. to represent PACE, and I think it's a great environment for us to get on, discuss as a community, and learn. And once again, we're grateful. So that is the conclusion of our program. We wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
everyone.